Hello, everyone. So, Inside Out. Who does not know this movie? I mean, you might not. And if you don't and chose to watch it, I hope you enjoyed it. It is one of my favorites from Pixar, and I think it has a pretty obvious message, but a very poignant and important message. And of course, the goal for the essay is to identify that message and explain how the movie sends it. So, with this lecture, we're going to dive into the movie and identify what its message is and talk about some ways that it achieves that message. So, we'll start with a little intro, and I will give some context because, of course, context is always important when you're trying to analyze something. So, this is Pixar's 15th film, and it was directed by this guy, Pete Docter. And if you don't know who that is, he's the current head of Pixar, and he brought us such movies as Monsters, Inc., Up, and more recently, Soul. So, he is very prolific at Pixar. For some historical and socio-cultural context, the film was released almost 10 years ago, if you can believe it, 2015. And just to give some general historical context, 2015 and socio-cultural context, 2015, I am just giving a general feel of how things were on the mental health front. I would say that mental health was beginning to be talked about more and more in 2015. And guys, honestly, 2015 feels like a world away. Of course, 2016 brought a lot of political upheaval, to say the least. But leading up to that, 2015, we had such tragedies as San Bernardino, and it was just a time when people were starting to talk a lot about mental health, at least a lot more, I would say. The conversation, I would argue, was definitely ramping up, and you know, throughout the 2000s into the 2010s especially, mental health and mental illness became less taboo subjects, definitely. And the reason I bring that up is because it's significant to what Inside Out is trying to communicate. So, let's continue. Something interesting about Inside Out, I wanted to talk about how it's not the first Disney movie about personified emotions or little people inside your head. So I wanted to hit upon that because I found it interesting how Inside Out, sort of reflecting the times we're in now, is a lot more nuanced than other Disney films similar to it, so that were released a long time ago. So the film does have the genre of a Disney movie, and I think that's rather ironic considering Disney is all about happiness. Disneyland is the happiest place on earth, right? So it is a bit funny that the movie's whole message is it's okay to be sad. You don't have to be happy all the time. So it definitely is playing with its genre for rhetorical effect, and it is providing a more nuanced picture of mental health and emotional balance than Disney movies that came before. I wanted to show y'all a little clip from this film from the 1940s called Emotion and Reason, or Reason and Emotion, and see how it differs from Inside Out.
Stop! You can't go to work without tires and gasoline.
He's got the right dough.
Don't believe everything you hear.
We're losing. He said so.
Don't be stampeded by hearsay.
I'll believe anything I want
You
to.
must use judgment and guard against...
Oh, we're in a
That's
mess.
right,
We haven't
Emotion.
got it.
Go ahead.
Control yourself.
Put reason out of the way. That's great. Fine. For Hitler. That master rabble-rouser destroys reason by preying upon the weakness of emotion with fear, sympathy, pride, and hate, just as he did in the minds of the German people. Behold, the Nazi Superman. So you see, fellows, for us, there is but one answer. You, reason, your job is to think, to plan, to discriminate. And you, emotion, to be a fine, strong emotion. An emotion that loves his country, his freedom, his life. And together, you must be grimly determined to fight against all odds. With reason firmly in the driver's seat, handling the controls along the difficult course to victory, and with emotion by his side, we will go on and do the job we've set out to do. And we'll do it right.
So we can see in that one from the 1940s, it is a World War II propaganda movie. And it is casting emotion as the bad guy. And, well, you know, the guy who needs to be in check. So that makes sense in the context of World War II, where it was a problem of people getting swept up in Hitler's rhetoric, etc., because of their emotions. So during that time, emotion wouldn't be portrayed in the most positive light. But since then, we have come to understand that all emotions are important, right? They make us who we are, as we see in the movie with the islands of personality, etc., that are formed from the core memories the emotions help make. So, yeah, it is much more nuanced than other similar Disney films that came before it. And specifically, it talks about how sadness is an important and good emotion, even though historically it hasn't always been perceived that way. So let's continue to look at that. There are various symbols in Inside Out, and I wanted to talk about them a little bit, although I did want y'all to sort of consider these on your own, and you're free to use any of these for the essay, which requires you look at one symbol. But the ones I picked are the core memories. I just talked about how the emotions help make core memories, and core memories shape our identity, so that shows that emotions, including sadness, are important. There's also Bing Bong's rocket and the idea bulb, the one that causes Riley to want to run away from home, that sadness has to remove, so that shows how sadness is important. Bing Bong's rocket, that is a lot to do with loss, right? Because, of course, we lose Bing Bong. Spoilers if you didn't watch the movie. We lose Bing Bong, and Riley has to grow up, and growing up means facing change, like losing your imaginary friend, moving to a new place, and the rocket and how it has its final launch to help Joy save sadness before Bing Bong fades away. It just shows that in order to thrive as a person, you need to grow up and move on and accept change, and allowing yourself to be sad is a big part of that, of accepting change, accepting loss, etc. And then there's the twisty tree. Oh, the twisty tree, probably the most important symbol ever. The twisty tree. It is the subject of that core memory that is both happy and sad, because Riley was sad because she lost that big game for the hockey team. But her parents comforted her, and her friends, the team, did also. So she became happy because of her sadness, and I might even go as far as to make a little bit of a reach and say the twisty tree shows how happiness and sadness are twisted together, and how you can't have happiness without sadness, you know? And I don't think it's any mistake that Joy, when she has to save Sadness and get her back to headquarters after realizing how important she is, she uses a balloon tree, the wind from a balloon tree, to blow Sadness towards headquarters. That I don't think is a mistake. So the twisty tree, big symbol about how happiness and sadness are tied together and inseparable, and how sadness is important, and how happiness, which we all value, can't exist without sadness. Alright, so, by the way, feel free to use any of those symbols, for the essay, and I do want to have a discussion board where y'all, sort of, find the meaning of symbols that I give y'all to discuss on there. So feel free to work off what I just said about these. And yeah. There you go. Those are the symbols I found. You might find others, and I might have an additional one on the discussion board for you to discuss. But those are the symbols I thought were most prominent to the message. And moving on, I did want to talk about the themes more in general. Like I said, Riley faces a lot of change, and allowing herself to feel sad is what helps her cope with that change. Not only change, but loss. Riley loses her old life and friends in Minnesota. Fear, anger, and disgust lose joy and sadness. Bing Bong loses Riley, and then he dies, fades away, loses his existence. So how do we deal with loss? I would say the film uses a method of development to advance its message or its main point, that being the problem-solution method, because it shows us all of this loss throughout the movie. It happens over and over again. And the solution is let yourself be sad, accept change. Yeah, because in headquarters, they wouldn't let themselves feel sad. Remember, anger, fear, and disgust were trying desperately to make Riley happy. And the only way to heal from changes and loss is to let yourself feel sad so your family and friends can comfort you. And sadness is useful, as we can see throughout the movie. Obviously, the main conflict that needs to be resolved is between happiness. Who the hell is that? Joy and sadness. And that conflict needs to be resolved, and it is at the very end. Joy initially doesn't know what sadness is good for or understand what she's good for, but sadness is extremely helpful. She navigates back to She helps navigate back to headquarters thanks to Joy giving her busy work like reading those manuals. So that just shows how they were meant to work together, even if they didn't initially want to, or even if Joy didn't initially want to work with her. She helps Bing Bong cope with loss. That was a really prominent scene showcasing what sadness's use is. And she also highlights the importance of negative emotions, even though they seem to be not good for us, they really are. Such as fear. She scares Riley awake so they can continue on the train of thought to get back to headquarters. So sadness has more uses than we might expect. And of course, the whole movie is about how sadness is important. And just to underscore just to illustrate further how important she is, at the very beginning, you can see that she is one of the first emotions Riley develops right after joy. Hell, they might have developed at the same time. It's not entirely clear, or sadness came second, and I think that just goes to show that you need both right away. These are your two most important emotions. And like I have been saying, the film shows us that true happiness derives from our loved ones giving us comfort when we feel sad. So the film is against, I don't know if y'all have heard this term before, toxic positivity, or forcing yourself to be okay when you're not, which is not the way to achieve real happiness, obviously, because that's just going to be a false happiness. Yeah, so we need to let ourselves be sad to form and maintain our relationships. Family Island wouldn't exist if Riley didn't love her family, and she loves her family because she uh, feels sad. And when she feels sad, her family comforts her, and they bond, and they become closer. So yeah, sadness, not a bad emotion at all. All right, so I wanted to talk about one or two other things that I thought were significant. Something else I wanted to talk about was the significance of shapes. So Pete Docter, the director of the movie, he is known for using shapes to convey aspects of his characters when doing character design. If you notice, for example, in Up, Carl is very square, whereas Ellie is very round, and even their accessories, like her chair, his chair, her lamp, his lamp, etc. We can tell so much about the characters just by their shapes, because square, angular shapes usually mean rigid, whereas round, curved shapes usually mean dynamic or fluid. So that makes sense in the case of Up. We have Carl being sort of set in his ways and not wanting to go anywhere, as opposed to Ellie, who was so adventurous, etc. And in something like Monsters, Inc., also Sully, very square in his general profile, plays by the rules, is a workaholic, is all about professionalism, etc. Whereas Mike is more excitable. So, and of course Mike is round. So we can also see that in Inside Out. If you notice, fear, disgust, and anger are pretty angular, I would say. Anger, definitely, because he is a square. So of course he is always anger, and there's not really any changing that. And the same goes for fear and disgust. Disgust is rather square, perhaps not in her face, but the way her face is framed with her hair. And her skirts, I noticed, are also pretty rigid and angular, as opposed to Joy's dress, which flows. So yeah, and fear, disgust, and anger don't really change. They are what they are, and they attempt to be something they're not to make Riley happy, and they attempt to make happy core memories, but of course they make a huge mistake by almost having Riley run away. Joy and sadness are different. Joy and sadness, their designs use curves and round shapes. And I would argue that this is because they are fluid characters. Because, of course, Joy has to adapt and learn that she needs to work with sadness. And she eventually does by the end of the movie. And sadness, she is initially kept away from the other emotions by Joy, who initially thinks she isn't good for anything. But she learns her worth, and she becomes a vital part of the team of emotions. And she can't exist without Joy, and she sees that, and Joy sees that at the end of the movie. So I think their shapes are significant in conveying that they are fluid, dynamic characters, whereas fear, anger, and disgust, more so static characters. And then we also have colors. If you notice, Joy is the only non-monochromatic emotion. She has blue hair in addition to her yellow body. So what does that mean? I honestly think probably the most straightforward interpretation is she needs sadness to exist. You can't have happiness without sadness. And of course, blue often represents sadness. Of course, we've all heard the phrase feeling blue, etc. And sadness's color is blue. So the fact that joy has two colors seems to really drive home the whole point of the movie, that you can't have joy without sadness. The movie also says a lot about growing up as a theme. It is very much a coming-of-age story because it's about her emotional development, Riley's emotional development, to where she can balance happiness and sadness. And I think the loss of Bing Bong shows that we have to grow up to develop emotionally. We have to leave childhood behind. And I think that is represented also by the fact that she moves literally away from her childhood to a new place physically, from Minnesota to San Francisco. And I thought this was interesting also. Sadness in Riley's mom's mind seems to be the leader of the emotions, and I think that just goes to show that the older you get, the more well-adjusted you get with new life experiences. So growing up goes hand in hand with developing emotionally and reaching emotional maturity. The film also grapples with depression, and I think it is interesting that it makes a clear distinction between sadness and depression, because sadness is not even present in headquarters when Riley starts to experience depression, which is what I would call the console turning black and the emotions not being able to make her feel anything. So depression is bad, obviously, but sadness is good. So that just the fact that they distinguish between the two, I think, is important, because those two often get confused. People might say, oh, you're just sad, get over it. But really, depression is something much, much more serious and worse. And sadness is not bad at all, the film says. So I think the film also makes an important comment on the nature of depression. And that leads me to my final thoughts. I think the film overall speaks against toxic positivity in favor of true happiness, which can exist without sadness. We wouldn't be able to be happy if we didn't have moments of sadness where people in our lives who we love come to comfort us. That's overall what it's all about. And I think that's and that's what makes us who we are at the end of the day. That's how we develop our core memories, and that's how we develop our islands of personality, if you will. And the film, so you need to feel. Emotions are good. If you can't feel anything, of course, that is depression, the movie says. So the film's message is timeless, and I think it's especially relevant in our current moment when, anxiety is high. And of course, we have anxiety here, and I just say that because of world events. Like, since this first movie came out, we've had COVID. We're now having 2 wars overseas, and, it can be a stressful time. And I just wanted to note that I have not seen Inside Out 2 yet at the time of recording this, but I doubtless think it'll extend the themes of growing up. And that because Riley is a teenager, and I do believe it will talk about anxiety and its uses in our crazy world we live in nowadays. Alright guys, so those are my thoughts on Inside Out, and hopefully that gave you some guidance. I will see y'all next time. Thank you guys.
In lieu of answering questions, please simply summarize the lecture in 3 or more sentences. The AI policy applies, so the summary cannot be totally AI generated, and needs to test below 20% on the AI detectors I use.